9 Presidents Assassinated by Globalists by Larry Engel. This is Article 2 about President Ronald Reagan and a faked assassination attempt and the takeover of the United States government. In this series of articles, I point out how presidential policy that opposes the agenda of the globalists results in the assassination of the President of the United States. We know of 4 assassinations by bullet, but I have found 5 other presidents that have been poisoned, and also 4 where the attempt had failed. The one thing that they all have in common is that they opposed the agenda of the central banking cartel and the New World Order. Instead, each followed policies that would benefit the nation and the people. To understand more about wars and slavery and the narcotics trade and the political power of the central bank of issue, I recommend reading The Invisible College by author William Stewart, who traces their history from 700 AD. My article today is about President Ronald Wilson Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, who served as president from 1981 to 1989. At the time Reagan was president, the 3 television networks commanded more than 70% of the nation's audience. These 3 major networks outlets refused to carry the President Reagan's actual speeches to the people. The network owners cut the people off from the President of the United States of America, and the government was then overthrown. The dates are February 3rd, 1988 and October 14th, 1987, and also earlier in June of 86. This is sedition. This is not freedom of the press. This article from Peter J. Moyer was published in February 1988 on February 3rd. The second refusal in 4 months. Network rejection of the presidential speech is unusual, but the refusal last night was the second in less than 4 months. On October 14th, the 3 broadcast networks declined to carry the president's address in support of Supreme Court nomination Judge Robert H. Bork. They said that the speech was partisan and contained nothing new. Before that, the networks turned down a coverage of Mr. Reagan in June of '86, also when he was making a plea on behalf of the rebels and the Contras, which involved narcotics, I'm sure, and I'm sure Reagan would never have approved of the narcotics. Joseph F. Pyronen, the CBS News bureau chief in Washington, was among those advising against live coverage last night. He said, in short, I do not believe that there is going to be a new argument in today's address that the American public is not already familiar with. Mr. Pyronen said yesterday, in fact, today's address is really directed at a small group of people on Capitol Hill. So my recommendation is not to interrupt our prime broadcast to carry that. Now, who elected Mr. Pyronen? I don't think anyone. So how can he censor our president from us? This is terrible, I think. We will never know what the president would have told us had he been given the opportunity to address the nation, and what course of history would have taken when he had been able to retake the lead. I do not trust what the networks reported was the actual topic of his speeches. I believe the president had far more important issues to address to us and likely kept his topics very close at hand. I think it would be smart of him to withhold some information until he could actually reach the American people. The mass media is controlled and is owned by the globalists who have taken over the government now. I felt that I had been censored from hearing my president. It made me very angry, very, very angry, that anyone could tell the president to shut up when he believed he had important issues to share with the nation. All the stations belonging to the networks operate on frequencies that belong not to the stations themselves, but to the American people. There are networks, there are frequencies. The buildings and the equipment belong to the station owner, but the airways belong to us. Basically, by not airing the president, these private businesses, obligated by bank loans, stole the government away from the people and their elected president. I wanted to send the military in to arrest the culprits and charge them with sedition and attempting to overthrow our government and our freedom. The central banking cartel takes over the press with loans and creates a monopoly. A monopoly knows no freedom of the press. This is the agenda of the globalists. It is my firm belief that President Reagan intended to lead the nation up a pathway that opposed the globalist agenda. In Central America at the time, the CIA, globalists, and international powers had a secret narcotics industry in full operation. CIA officer and whistleblower, codenamed Pegasus, Chip Tatum, his stuff's on YouTube if you want to try to look it up, speaks about this drug operation, and I'll put one of the clips up. Reagan was a kind of person who would never have approved narcotics trade or anything of this nature. So the globalist-controlled press just cut him off from the nation. It prevented Reagan from making policy and leading the nation. He was not permitted to use the bully pulpit. Maybe the most important issue is that George Herbert Walker Bush was vice president during Reagan's administration. He was a member of the assassination organization named Skull and Bones, and one-time head of the CIA. In a speech on TV when he became president, Daddy Bush forced upon us, the American people, the European Bod Dracula, the Impaler bloodline agenda, the New World Order form of government. This is definitely not freedom of our founding fathers, and this is definitely the agenda of the central bank of issue cartel. Quote, on September 11, 1990, President Herbert Walker Bush addressed the nation and voiced those now infamous words before a joint session of Congress. Now quoting Bush, the crisis in the Persian Gulf, is grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move forward a historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. And then the quote goes on, not Bush, but American Free Press. Bush the Elder is a longtime luminary of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and Skull and Bones. These have an interlocking leadership and a common goal of world government, according this time to the American Free Press. Also, I noted that he accepted a title of nobility, kneeling his body down to the ground and bowing his head to a foreign queen, to the Queen of England, and he became a knight or a noble, a title of nobility which is not allowed in the Constitution. We can't have titles of nobility here. But he decided to do that. I guess he just wanted the power. On another issue, CIA officer Chip Tatum states that George Herbert Walker Bush issued a murder order on the daughter of Ross Perot at her wedding if the third-party candidate, Perot, would not drop out of the 1992 presidential race. Even though Perot dropped out, Bush ultimately lost to Clinton. Could this mean Bush and company wanted the presidency so bad that they would threaten to take the life of even the president to achieve their goal and invoke the agenda of the globalists, not just kill the daughter of a candidate who they thought might split the vote? I wonder. A deathbed confession implicates Skull and Bones men in the assassination of U.S. presidents. Unfortunately, Reagan had one standing at his back as vice president. And I'll put that citing up so you can see that deathbed confession if you want to research it. President Reagan was famous in movies and on TV. He had a very positive public image and was very popular with the people. The fact that his attempts to address our nation were repeatedly censored by the New World Order-controlled mass media should tell us he opposed the globalist agenda. On the night that he was first elected, he made a spontaneous exclamation in which he gave credit, saying that his election for president was truly a victory of Jesus Christ. I heard this from myself. The globalist agenda is very zealously anti-Christian. It is Luciferian. Reagan also said at other times he frequently thanks his maker, God. Reagan's choice for CIA boss, DCI is what they're called, was William Casey, who was a very trusted and close associate who had been his campaign manager. Casey was deeply religious and a devoted Catholic. He brought many of his Catholic associates into the CIA with him. He was medically murdered a few days before he was to appear before a congressional investigating committee. They were investigating the Mossad CIA narcotics operation in Central America called Iran-Contra. Casey was very loyal and would have had the credibility to successfully defend Reagan and oppose the takeover of his presidency by Skull and Bones and rogue elements in the CIA Operations Division. It is rare that we get a look inside Skull and Bones and the Bush family. Allegations that George W. Bush, the Jr., performed a homosexual act on a current U.S. ambassador to Poland, Victor Ashe, in the mid-1980s have resurfaced in a tell-all memoirs of a woman who first made the claim. Leola McConnell, former liberal Democratic candidate for governor of Nevada and one-time prostitute for hire, was met with deafening silence on behalf of the majority of the corporate media last year when she sensationally alleged that Bush and Ashe regularly hired bisexual men for secret sex sessions in the 80s, when Bush was at that time, that's not Herbert Walker, that's the son, W, was a private citizen. Very telling, isn't it? This is a quote again from McConnell. In 1984, I watched George W. Bush enthusiastically and expertly perform a homosexual act on another man, one Victor Ashe. McConnell is missing and most likely murdered for what she knows about Skull and Bones and the Bush family. Homosexuals are vigorously anti-Christian, so they would be anti-Reagan and they would be anti-Casey, which turns out to be pretty much the case. President Reagan was a close friend and ally of Ferdinand Marcos, the president of the Philippine Islands. Marcos had been a strong ally of the USA against the Japanese in World War II. In 1983, the globalists set out to destroy Marcos because he was a strong leader and loyal to his own nation and a nationalist who opposed the New World Order, Viper, and a theft group, the banker agenda. Reagan strongly supported his friend against the globalist agenda at first. But soon Reagan began to distance himself from his friend and the issue. Could this change be because President Reagan feared for his own life? Was no longer in charge of the presidency? Did Spain and Europe retake from America the control of the Philippine Islands they had lost during the Spanish-American War? If Reagan was assassinated, and Vice President Bush took over as president, Bush would have been very unpopular and suspected by the American people. Lyndon Johnson was suspected when Kennedy was assassinated. Reasonably so, he was part of the early plans. So a plan would have to be devised to surmount this problem. If they could keep Reagan in office, but totally control the president, it would be an ideal situation for them. Reagan was very popular with the people, and it was ideal if they could secretly take over and run the government behind the scenes in a manner that would push the globalist agenda at the expense of the American people, while the popular Reagan served as only a front, but without access to the networks. It appears a plan was devised. This would set up a fake assassination of Reagan scenario, totally under their control, and if the president agreed to not interfere, let them take over the government and run his administration and the government of the United States of America. They would allow him to live. If he did not agree, then the assassination drama would end in his death. Reagan was a very honorable human being, and it must have been very difficult to get control over him. His wife Nancy greatly feared for his life. I think she knew he would fight back with every ounce of his soul. How would you handle it if you were put in President Reagan's situation? The Reagan assassination scenario began on March 30th, 1981. He had been president for only 69 days. I had an acquaintance, a highly qualified contact in the CIA, who told me that Reagan had been shot with a dart, a flechette filled with poison, by the Secret Service agent who jumped on top of him in the limousine as Hinckley was firing his bullets. My friend told me that in the hospital, they assured the president that if he will obey their orders, they would remove the flechette without injecting the poison, and he would live. But if he did not agree, the poison would be injected, and he would die, and Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, the father, would become president. Now let me remind you that I work from observation, intuition, and my opinion. I do not try to make a legal case, so please use your judgment with what you hear today. I do totally believe the statement, because President Reagan himself stated he did not know he had been shot until the Secret Service agent jumped on top of him in the back of the limo. He thought the agent had suddenly broken his rib at the instant he jumped on top of him. He gives talk show host Larry King the official explanation for public consumption. But what would you say if you were in his situation? I think Reagan tells us exactly when and by whom he was shot. But he does it in such a way that it would not trigger another attack from his captors. The planning of the assassination scenario begins with the selection of the time and the place. What better place than a luncheon speech to representatives of the AFL-CIO? When the president is shot, the people will suspect the Union and organized crime. Keep in mind, this president was a conservative, a very extreme right-wing politician, and very outspoken on anti-union themes. One problem the globalists had to overcome is that this is one of the most secure places there is. It's called the President's Walk, an enclosed passageway built after the assassination of JFK, but also they could manage this location to their advantage. It offered them control. The president is only exposed for 10 yards between the hotel and the limo. The shooter, John Hinckley Jr., was, shall we say, very lucky to be in just the right place, the right very small spot, at just the right time? Or maybe he was told where and when to wait. This location allowed them to control all the area surrounding the planned event. The president usually wears a bulletproof vest when in public, and the Secret Service advised him not to wear one on this day. A flechette, a dart, would not penetrate a bulletproof vest. Maybe one of these tough Union gangster reps might take a shot at the president. But hey, why bother with a bulletproof vest when you're talking to these thugs? This Secret Service advice seems very, very strange to me. The gun that Hinckley used was a small caliber .22. This is a gun an expert might recommend if they wanted to improve the chances that if someone was hit with a stray bullet, they would not be killed. The brand of cartridges Hinckley used is called Devastator. They contain a small amount of aluminum and lead azide, which causes them to explode on contact. Remember now, the bullets explode on contact. One exploded when it hit James Brady in the head, causing extreme damage. Later, you will not have this kind of bullet when you investigate later, because it's destroyed, so you won't have any bullet slug evidence. Could this represent a double-speak type of cover story? Depending on how the president responded to their offer, 1, the bullet was removed and the president will live, or 2, the bullet exploded when the president walked into the hospital, and so sorry, he is now dead. So those are two choices maybe with the Devastator bullet. Interesting choice of ammo. With a Delahanty, that was one of the guards that was shot, volunteer doctors removed the bullet from his neck. It didn't blow up because it hit soft flesh. The doctors volunteered and they wore bulletproof vests during the operation. But no vests were used by President Reagan's doctors. Was that because it wasn't a Devastator bullet in Reagan? It was a flechette? I wonder. Interesting question anyway. In the limo, Reagan said he was okay and wanted to be taken to the White House. But officials credit the Secret Service agent with saving the president's life by ignoring the president's order and taking him instead to the hospital. But was the President of the United States taken to a hospital that was really a trap with medical doctors, maybe one medical doctor or somebody in there who was skull and bones or something like that? This happens in other scenarios that we will visit during this series of articles. Professionals and business people, usually Pharisees, who volunteer to work for Israel Mossad are called Sayanim. That's an interesting subject to look up. You can look that up and read more about it, about the Sayanim. They will spy and harm the USA and their fellow Americans who are not part of their order. Was the president just a goy Gentile caught in a Sayanim trap? If Sayanim are caught, they can flee to Israel, where they will be protected by the Israeli government. All of Hinckley's bullets were accounted for, and none of them hit President Reagan. What is claimed by the Secret Service, the official story, is that one of the bullets hit the armored limo, did not explode on impact, as it was made and designed to do, and then entered the president under his left armpit. This bullet hit the armor of the limo, didn't flatten out, ricocheted, then found its way through a 3-inch gap near the door, hit the president under the arm while he was being pushed into the limo, and hit his rib and ricocheted again. And this is the official claim, the fairy tale. The official story is a fairy tale. Now, later the doctors had a comment to make. The bullet was removed intact, although its shape had been distorted by striking Mr. Reagan's rib, the doctor said publicly after completing the surgery. Why didn't it explode into tiny fabrics as the one that hit Brady's skull did? Something very strange here between the official Secret Service statements on one hand, the public doctor's reports on the other, and the president's own statements. We have two different stories, the official one and mine, at least the one I'm claiming is the scenario. I wonder if I were to jump on someone's back in the rear of a limousine, I wonder where I would be able to shoot him with a dart gun or a flechette. I would think it would be right where Reagan was hit, under his arm that was extended upward. Hinckley said that he had shot the president because he liked the actress Jodie Foster. And I think we all like the actress Jodie Foster as an actress. It's interesting that Hollywood would magically benefit the enormous amount of free worldwide publicity to be generated by this assassination scenario. And one of their movies did too. Here's a report from the Golden Globes 2013. Jodie Foster hints she is a lesbian. Jodie Foster has appeared to acknowledge publicly for the first time that she is a lesbian in a speech at the Golden Globes 2013. Accepting the Cecil B. DeMille Award, Foster said, "I hope you are not disappointed that there would not be a big coming out speech tonight. I already did my coming out about 1,000 years ago. The coming out in the homosexual community means you tell the world that you're homosexual, you don't try to hide it anymore. Back in the days," goes on Foster, "when a fragile young girl would open up to trusted friends and family and co-workers, and then gradually, proudly, to everyone who knew her, to everyone who she actually met. But now, apparently, every celebrity is expected to expose the details of their private life with a press conference, a fragrance and reality show," Jodie Foster said. Her exact quote was, "I'm sorry, that's just not me. I never will be." So there you go. For the first time, the ferociously private Foster had publicly alluded to the fact that she was a homosexual, somewhat of an open secret in Hollywood. This fits in with the other anti-Christian publicity in the media about gay this and gay that. It does seem to strangely tie in with other globalist agendas and the propaganda activities. So if they're anti-Christian, then they're anti the CIA Director Casey, who's a Catholic, and they would be anti-President Reagan and anyone else who is a Christian. That seems to be something we should be concerned with. Hinckley made reference to the movie The Taxi Driver, where Foster was the co-star. The movie is based upon the actions of presidential assassin who actually shot George Curly Wallace, governor of Alabama, as he was running for president. In a separate report on Wallace, I tried to identify another strike against the nationalists who would likely have won the presidency. Where does all this money come from to finance Hollywood movies? The bankers and the Fed, they can buy all the $100 bills they want for 4 cents each. That's legal for them to do that. And then they've put the money into movies and other kinds of propaganda media. Well, can you buy $100 bills for 4 cents? Another point of interest in this scenario, Alexander Haig at the time was Secretary of State. Since the president was not dead, there was no official transition of power to the vice president. Haig took charge of the government because he was there in Washington. This seems normal to me. It would be as if the president were out of town a couple of days or maybe just sleeping late. But the censored press made a very big issue of Haig's action. I wonder why. The uncontrolled media claiming that the power had been transferred to the Vice President Bush, and that Haig was acting to take over the government from Bush. It's like the press somehow knew that the scenario, in fact, even if Reagan president was still alive, that George Herbert Walker Bush, Daddy, was really now the person in charge and not Haig. Haig became a spoiler of the scenario, a wild card suddenly appearing in their carefully constructed plans. Even if still alive, Reagan had been compromised, would have turned the government over only 69 days after having been elected. Haig was still a free agent, a high Reagan administration officer, his actions proper, within bounds, if Reagan still held the power. But the president did not. Haig also upset the whole scripted scenario by taking charge of the government until Ronald Reagan might return to his office, because he walked into the hospital, he wasn't dead. While Reagan was in the hospital, a press conference was underway in the White House, and the press secretary withdrew a few moments later, kind of confused. Haig himself entered the briefing room, where he made the following statement. Now, this is quoted from Alexander Haig. Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so. As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending the return of the Vice President and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course. Those in the Situation Room reportedly laughed. Those are reporters, right? They all laughed when they heard him say, I'm in control here. Ha ha ha. Hey, you're not in control here. We know the scenario, right? Maybe. Does this mean the reporters knew Reagan was to be compromised, the government taken over, and the president's man, Haig, was now history? Later, Haig was to say, I wasn't talking about transition. I was talking about the executive branch, who was running the government while the president was away. That was the question asked. It was not, who is in the line should the president die, said Haig. Haig was right. The president walked in the hospital. There was no reason to believe that he would not soon return to his post. Haig could not know the American government had been secretly overthrown and subverted. Was it a coincidence that only a few days before the shooting, Vice President Bush received the assignment of running crisis management in case of an emergency? Secretary of State Alexander Haig objected to this. And do you wonder if he suspected something? The timing of the Bush assignment to the unusual vice president duty is very suspicious and fits in very closely with the Flechette scenario. Another strange thing that leads me to seriously consider this assassination scenario is that the FBI took control of the nuclear football gold codes against strong objections of the United States military officers in charge. The gold cards are the nuclear launch codes that are purportedly provided to the President of the United States of America in his role as Commander-in-Chief. Prepared by the National Security Agency, the code sequence is printed on a plastic card nicknamed the Biscuit, which is similar to a credit card that the President carries on his person at all times. The concept behind the codes is that they permit the President to positively identify himself as the Commander-in-Chief and thereby authenticate a launch order to the National Military Command Center. Should a launch situation arise, the codes would be transmitted to the National Military Code Center. The football was separated from President Ronald Reagan immediately after the 1981 assassination attempt against him. Reagan, over his objection, was separated from the gold cards when his clothing was cut off by the emergency room trauma team. Then the gold codes were taken over by the FBI with no authority to do so. The code biscuit was later discovered unsecured, lying in the president's shoes on the floor of the emergency room. Now what the devil is that? That must raise a big question in your mind too. Some maniac doctor, nurse, or janitor could have launched a nuclear war. The terrorist team member from some organization might have been waiting at the hospital for the opportunity to snatch the card. Holding the cards would be a very, very strong way to intimidate and scare this president. They might threaten the president that they would launch a nuclear war if he didn't do what they say, because they had the cards with the presidential ID on it. Now, there's a situation that occurred months later when President Reagan fell asleep during a major international conference. Did the president, who is a professional actor, pretend like he fell asleep to send the nation a message that he was no longer in charge, that he had no control over his own government? I would think as an actor, he might think of that. That might be something very clever for him to do. In each assassination, the target security agents and their doctors become part of the operation. They are told to do exactly as they are instructed, or they or their family members will be killed. This is not a threat, because the fact is that they will be killed, and the killer is protected by the big financial powers. We can examine each assassination with this thought in mind, and the plan becomes fairly obvious to us. It's something that has been done in the past. In this series of articles, I speculate about the relationship between the president's agenda and the agenda of the globalists. I offer my opinion and my questions. I do not accuse any person of wrongdoing. Reagan is one of 4 presidents who survived the assassination attempt. I just use my observation, my intuition, and my opinion in an attempt to try to understand how the globalists maintain their power against the interests of the people of the nation and the nation itself. There are certain things that presidents do that threaten the globalist power structure and their status as world power. And when that happens, I observe that the globalists, the black nobility, the Bilderberger Group, the billionaire communists, the Black Pope Jesuit Society, the Skull and Bones, and including the corporate monopoly, mastered by loans and controlled by loans, and the mass media, are totally ruthless and sinister to the extreme, and would not hesitate to assassinate a president, a SEAL team, a senator, a congressman, and many others that I have found in pursuing this project.